Homelessness all over the headlines this week, and this evening we are going to answer a question that many of you have been asking for years now. If San Francisco spends nearly $250 million on the homeless every year, why are there still thousands of people living on the street? Where does that money go, and how does the system work or not work? KPIX 5's Wilson Walker takes it all apart for us.
It's the result of programs that are not really working, not working to anybody's satisfaction.
Well, it's hard to argue with that, but to better understand how this all works, let's start with that one big number. $241 million. Now, of that, 50 million funds shelters and another 50 million fund health services for the truly homeless. But the single most important thing to know about that $241 million is that most of it has absolutely nothing to do with the people we see on the streets.
That is a great observation. I think it's missed by many in the city. We're not spending $241 million a year on the 7,000 or 8,000 people who are homeless in San Francisco. We're spending more than half of that money, actually, to keep people in permanent housing.
That's right. $140 million worth of the entire homeless budget houses approximately 9,000 people. And those are 9,000 people we don't even count as homeless.
It's like all of our hotels, people who've lived in housing for 10 years are in the homeless budget. So people will say, well, we don't notice it. But if we didn't spend that money, you'd notice it because the numbers would be off the charts.
So that leaves us with these 6,686 people we do count as homeless, and they fall into two separate categories: those in some kind of temporary shelter and those who actually live on the street.
Art Agnos and Feinstein were cool.
And two perfect examples of this walked right up to us while we were interviewing former Mayor Art Agnos. First is Lee, who might look like he lives on the street.
Well, I got a room.
And then there's Ron.
Why aren't you living in a room or of some kind now?
Well, I tried in North Beach, for example.
And at that point, we had some vintage impromptu Agnos.
I'll take you there.
Really? In Mission Street?
I'll take you to the diagnostic center.
And just like that, Ron was in the car with the former mayor and off to the Mission Neighborhood Resource Center. If you want a shelter bed in San Francisco, this is where you have to go, and you've got to be willing to play by the city's rules.
You have to do finger imaging and all this stuff to get an emergency shelter bed.
So a lot of people, like Richard here, make another choice.
So you choose not to go to the shelters?
Well, sure, partner. Come on, man. Have you actually been in some of these places?
Clearly, we're not meeting the demands that people have on the streets.
Want to make this even more complicated? San Francisco manages all of this through at least 8 different city departments, issuing some 400 contracts with at least 75 private organizations. A tangled network of services with no unifying oversight by the city that actually hands out most of the money.
The one area where we have not done as good of a job as we need to is really coordinating all of those systems.
Here's one little scenario for you. A man with mental health challenges is staying in a nonprofit or a charity shelter until one day he voluntarily checks out, lands in some trouble, lands in the custody of law enforcement, who takes him to a hospital where he spends some time in a psych ward. Now, in each one of these 3 cases, it can be recorded as a by-the-book acceptable outcome, even though the guy is back out on the street. And the city has no single unified way of tracking any of this, as people simply ricochet between service providers.
And if you're a provider, it's difficult to know what other services that individual or families are receiving.
Then there's another immense challenge facing San Francisco. Even if we could convince all of these people to accept help, our best services do not scale to the overwhelming demand.
Navigation centers do a good job for those they serve, but the numbers are so small. You're talking about 50 people here. Come on, you're talking about a 6,000 person problem.
So how do we ever start to untangle all of this with results we can actually see?
That's a great question, and I think really the only way that we're going to change people's perception is by making progress.
Right, now that gentleman, Jeff Kosinski, is the man who is supposed to whip this whole system into shape. And tomorrow night, right here at 6 o'clock, we'll show you how he plans to do that. Now, if you're fed up with the situation on our sidewalks and you want to see some changes, I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised with what he has to say, because this guy is not messing around.
You know, all the best of luck to him, because others have come into this city and into the Bay Area and have tried. I've seen this story reported on for almost 40 years. And there's never been a solution. I'm so glad we're doing something. I'm so glad you're working on this. I got to see what he has to say, because I've heard others say they could fix it, and they couldn't.
He talks tough, and I mean it. I think a lot of people will hear this guy tomorrow night and say, you know what? It's about time.
Okay. Good. Looking forward to it. Wilson, thanks so much. Well, you'll be hearing a lot more about homelessness this week as we join other media outlets for the San Francisco Homeless Project. So, as we said, more to come tomorrow night at 6.